I invite Professor Balram Singh from Massachusetts, and he is already joined here. So I welcome you, sir, to deliver your lecture. Professor Balram Singh from USA.
जी नमस्ते नमस्ते वेलकम सर
Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself.
Namaskar, Professor R.C. Sinhaji.
नमस्ते जी
There
नमस्ते
are so many of you whom I am familiar with, Professor Jata Sankar ji and Professor R.P. Singh ji and Prashant Shukla and many, I think Professor Bhatt is probably part of it. And I'm so grateful to get this opportunity of somebody who is really a chemist by training to get an opportunity to talk about some things, some thoughts in a philosophy conference, especially this is the most prominent people that I know in philosophy are in this audience. One of the good thing is I don't have to name everybody because with this virtual thing, everybody's name is visible. So I salute to all of you. And one of the other features of science people is that they have a tendency to make some presentation. So I have some slides, if it is okay to share my slides. Let's see, because that just has become my nature to only speak through slides, and that just gives me one thing that I'm not obviously not a. Let's see if I can get it all through. Can you see my screen?
Is showing that it's presenting, sir.
Okay.
No,
So
but
now
it's not
I
visible.
need to find my slides. Where can I find them? Okay, got it. So I have, can you see my slides? Are my slides visible? Yes?
yes now it
Okay,
oh,
very good. So I decided to,
Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I decided to speak on Gandhi, and I enjoyed very much all the conversation, especially the interaction between Eastern and Western, including the question of whether there is India has a philosophy or not. Professor Chandra and I had one conversation in, I think, 2009, courtesy of Professor R.P. Singh, who had invited me to speak on a philosophy conference, that whether what is really philosophy and what is darshan and how science related to it. So I think this question is always going to be there. It depends on who defines what. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. So Gandhi is the best example to illustrate this, because someone, of course, Sri Aurobindo is as well, and I very much enjoyed Professor R.P. Singh's comments about his work and how he addressed about philosophy versus darshan, and how Sri Aurobindo and others thought about Western philosophers and the vice versa. So what I wanted to do is talk about, in origin and practice, a couple of points about Mahatma Gandhi that normally people don't maybe talk about. His background is very important. Actually, he's not. Maybe people don't talk about that much because they always think about him living very simple life towards the end when he was practicing his philosophy in India and also in South Africa. But actually, he comes from a very privileged background. His family, his father was a minister to a king, so he was very well protected. I mean, I can imagine myself coming to America in 1983, and I know my village. There were 200 people in my village who came to see me off at the road that I took a bus from. And so Gandhi, 100 years before me, went to study law, And so he must have been very well versed with at least the privileged class of the society at that time. So he was, what I'm trying to say, that his background is very important to know, that he was not exposed to what you would think that all the stuff that he was doing later on in his life, practicing his philosophy or developing his philosophy. It is something that we need to know, that he had to confront it. When he went to outside and people started talking about India, and in the terms that we are talking about, sometimes maybe very derogatory, and Gandhi being Gandhi, that is his own nature. He was probably confronted with that system, coming from privileged group, being talked down in an entirely new country. I think that got something inspired in him, and this is an aspect that's very important to know. Second aspect is that he was really familiar with only English and Gujarati. He did not know much about other languages, and so it is his knowledge was limited to Gujarati, limited to a privileged family, and then he was exposed to English. So many times, if he's influenced by the outside world, it is because that's the place where he could get knowledge, other than Gujarati, what is the traditional stuff. And thirdly, what I would like to say, he was a NRI, non-resident Indian, which is in some sense, it may be a very good opportunity. A person like me who looks at, I have some experience about that, who looks at India from far away. दूर दृष्टि जो कहते हैं ना, दूर in a literal meaning दूर दृष्टि हो जाती है, क्योंकि हम दूर से देखते हैं चीजों को. तो जैसे चंद्रमा बहुत अच्छा दिखाई पड़ता है दूर से देखें अगर उसको, तो लेकिन अगर नजदीक से देखें तो पत्थर है उसमें, कुछ ऐसी बात नहीं. एक बार तो मैंने उसको देखा, पत्थर, लोग बोलते हैं चंद्र के कोई चंद्रमुखी होता है, कोई ऐसा. तो मैंने एक बार देखा कि म्यूजियम में कि चंद्रमा का एक टुकड़ा रखा हुआ, अगर किसी को बोलें कि आपका मुंह ऐसे जैसा है, तो शायद आपको लोग थप्पड़ भी मारेंगे, बोलेंगे ये कोई बड़ी अच्छी बात नहीं है. तो anyway, NRI is another aspect of Gandhi that was very important. And I think that has a huge impact on his view and his philosophy and his interactions. So I'm just going to take one example. There's so much things about Gandhi. It's not possible, obviously. They're just trying to make a point here. Is that about education? Gandhi, as an example, I live in America, so Thomas Jefferson, who is considered founding father, and he talks about education. An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as free people. He's talking about a system, and that he says, and that any person born after that day should ever acquire the rights of citizenship until he could read and write. So their view of education was somehow so that you get instruction from government and you can follow. That is the tradition, fundamental tradition of education in the United States, for example. But Gandhi says very different. He said that man, I think, has had a liberal education, who has been so trained in youth that his body is the ready servant of his will and does with ease and pleasure all the work that as a mechanism it is capable of. So he's talking about very different kind of training in education. Of course, current Prime Minister says need to evolve India-specific ranking system for educational institutions. So it's also running, kind of deviating from what the so-called world order may be, even in education. I don't know whether in the new policy there is some effort to that effect, but I'm not sure whether we are really getting towards the Gandhi's view. So I will take this as an example to try to make some points about how that works and how that philosophy, Gandhi's philosophy, is so much ingrained within India. So I'm just talking about the origin. It's like deep down, he talks about that philosophy about education, where that you should be able to do everything that your body is capable of. You should be completely free. And that is very important to know where Gandhi is coming from. And that freedom, independence, equality are the basic fundamental anywhere, everywhere, but India has addressed it a lot more than anywhere else. And I wouldn't talk in too much detail, obviously, because of time. But yoga is a very important aspect. And so you see Gandhi, all his life, he practices in very many ways yoga, whether it's a Bhagavad Gita or about how he lives his life and with nature, or how he believes in Ram. It's really the underlying feature, origin of his life is in Indian yoga philosophy, where yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And then it's very important that you need to know yourself. He talks about Swaraj and other things. So it's about, you have to know tapa swadhyay, Ishwar pranidhanani. Whatever you do, you have to know through yourself. And then he believes in Swadharma and independence. Swadharma means you have to know what you are and you act accordingly. And he many times, many of his activities, including some political things that other people would not agree with him and these days very criticized. For example, he did not go violent way, but he never really opposed Subhash Chandra Bose or anybody. He just said that you do your own way, I would do my own way. So he was very much again ingrained in that philosophy. And so he always believed in karma without attachment. That is the kind of freedom that one gets if you do niskam karma. And that is Gandhi's, there's so many examples of his life, from his family to his party to his activities in London or in South Africa. He always believed in niskam karma without any attachment, and so much so that sometimes he has family discord. And finally, once you are totally in yourself, that's really the equality, because everybody is then equal, because everybody is completely established in his or her own self, according to his or her own nature and action, and completely detached. So that is the fundamental idea of his philosophy, that it does not come out that way. And that is very important. And many people who really only talk about reading and writing about things will not be able to understand, because he was a practitioner. I want to just say a couple of points of trying to support what I just said. Gandhi and Tulsi the Avdhi Ramayana, he says in his autobiography, and it is a fact that when this Ladha Maharaj was somebody who had some problem, disease, leprosy, but he said he cured. He had a melodious voice. He would sing the dohas and chaupais and explain them, losing himself in the discourse and carrying his listeners along with him. I must have been 13, very young age, but I quite remember being enraptured by his reading. That laid the foundation of my deep devotion to the Ramayana. Today I regard the Ramayana, Tulsidas, as the greatest book in all devotional literature. So, at very tender age, he was exposed to this Ramayana. And this is Audhi. He did not know Hindi. I would, if I have time, I will talk about that. I wanted to, this is not just to, of course, pitch in my book, that I have written a book called A Different Take, an NRI View of India in the tradition of Ram, Krishna and Gandhi. So I have used Gandhi's experience and my experience, and then try to understand Gandhi, because I am in some way in the similar situation, not in all the way. Obviously, he was lawyer, I'm a scientist, and many other differences. Like I said, he comes from a privileged class. I'm not in that kind of privileged class, coming from a village, and somebody whose father was just a adult teacher versus his father was a minister. But nevertheless, there are several common things that I have, and my view that I'm presenting here is in some sense reflecting that. So I just continuing with that, he actually did not know Hindi. He talks about, mostly he knew Gujarati. Most of the books that he translated, including his autobiography, he wrote in Gujarati, that got later on translated in other languages. But he supported, this is not here. The only thing I'm trying to show here, just for record, because it's probably being recorded also, so anybody who wants to look at later that can look at it. He did, the point I'm trying to make is that his major, his language was Gujarati, but he was the Hindi supporter, because, for a national cause that was very important. But his knowledge was mostly limited to Gujarati and English, and that's the point I'm trying to say here. Now, this is what I think his origin and practice from Indian perspective and where he got his ideas. Now, many people talk about he was influenced by John Ruskin, and his book, actually he even translated that book in again in he translated first in Gujarati and then it got translated in other languages. But he got this idea from him, but he has his, like I said, he has his own background, and that background always, so he sees, when he sees these things that kind of matches with his background where he comes from, either he has seen it, or he knows, he understands it, but he has never read it, and then he reads in English, and so he gets very influenced by something like John Ruskin, which is that the good of individual is contained in the good of all, as an example. Of course, it's something that Gandhi was familiar with this, like I said, in his teen years, but he has never been formally shown this, other than something like Ramayana. That the lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's, is that in as much as all have the same right of earning livelihood from their work. That the life of labor, that is the life of tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is life worth living. So all these things, it is not like, India is full of, India does not have history, Ramayana, Mahabharata, none of them, they have history of people having factories and being employed and all kind of stuff. That's not at all. That's actually India. It's just what is written here in John Ruskin's. It's really just India. So he kind of, the same way people talk about Gandhi was influenced by Henry David Thoreau. It's true, but especially about civil disobedience. And Henry David Thoreau is kind of neighbor here, where I live in New England, and they're known as Boston Brahmins here in this country. And there, this civil disobedience, Gandhi did see that. But Gandhi, again, going back to India, India did not have a system of governance, rules, and laws. People believed in dharma. And for Gandhi, non-ahimsa is one of very important dharma. So he was able to see it in Thoreau's writings, but it is not something that he kind of adopted that normally people think, at least in the Western world. And more importantly, actually, Henry Thoreau was more influenced by India before that. He read Bhagavad Gita, and like I said, they are known as Boston Brahmins in this area. And he wrote so much about how he learned from Bhagavad Gita and how he learned from Indian thoughts and Brahmins and Brahma and Ganga and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't Gandhi looking for the first time something. It was all being reflected on him. The same thing, people talk about Gandhi as a disciple of Tolstoy, because he was very honest. He always looked at whatever came to him, and he tried to be very practical and look at it the way it was. And so he talks about, he reads so much about Tolstoy. Actually, in Hind Swaraj, of the 20 books that were referred, there were 6 books from Tolstoy. And the Tolstoy's ideas of the kingdom of God is within you. It's the same as a Christian idea. Obviously, it's from Bible, and he was very devout Christian in a very different way, not exactly church type of Christian. And so the kingdom of God is within you is the same as Aham Brahmasmi. But so Gandhi was very much influenced by that. Same way, there was somebody by the name, some Das, I don't remember full name of that person, who wrote a letter to Tolstoy about India condition and how the British were treating them. And so Tolstoy took quite a bit of time to write back, something like 6,000 words letter back to this gentleman, letter to a Hindu, where he talks about a lot of things about Hindu. So he really knew. And what is art is something that was Gandhi very much influenced. And art is not just the painting and drawing, it is symbolism that he talks about. So Gandhi knew that symbolism in India is full of symbolism. All the deities, Sari Devi, Devta, Sare symbolism hai. Sara, if you really deeply understand from science perspective, that's what it is. So Gandhi was actually very much into that. But he was, I'm not going to read this whole thing because I obviously want to save time. But Gandhi had all these, what I'm trying to say is that he got this thing in English He was not exposed to much of the deeper knowledge in India because of his limitation to only Gujarati and then coming from a privileged family. So he reflected all this thing back, and then he did not follow any of these people. He just only got reflection, and then he made up his own. And actually, he did much better than any of these people. Gandhi's, these people are known as philosophers, but Gandhi is really the darshanik who lived life like that, and he believed in something similar to what would be a situation of I heard about the previous speaker talking about Ram. Ram is a practical person. Ram is somebody who believes in truth and then practices it. So Gandhi was in something of that nature. And the last slide I want to talk about. I hope that if I'm running out of time, please let me know and I will stop. I already made.
We are having sort of time, sir. Please finish. Please conclude in 2 minutes.
Okay. So actually, I don't need to. I've already made the points. What I wanted to just to say, summarize this universal values and political values and personal values of self-sacrifice, Ram Raj and Gram Raj. All these things become very practical for him. And he talks about Gram Raj, where like village versus city. And even today, if you really see, the villages are still much better compared in terms of living life. And in Hind Swaraj, he really criticized all this about civilization, language, doctor, lawyers, machinery, engineering, railways, and most of you all know exactly his regions. But he was influenced by it, and I think he may be proven eventually right. Although right now in today's world, people may not be thinking like that. But as we are looking at Corona time and environmental issues and other things, then we will find that that part he may really eventually have the last laugh, as they call it in English. And then the latest point that I think right now is going to be determining is the democracy versus Prajatantra. I think Prajatantra is a very different concept where people have their own skills and then they are able to work based on their skills, their crafts, and make a living out of it. Being independent, totally free market, which is the India's villages and other things, which will be very different than democracy. And as we are seeing in America and the rest of the world, the concept of democracy crumbling to a certain degree, I think the idea of Prajatantra might be very attractive. And so something that Gandhi believed that we must be the change we wish to see. And as was the Einstein saying, example isn't another way of to teach, but it is the only way. I think if that were practiced in India, like other speakers said before me, that darshan is something that you practice. Philosophy is just only talk about. And I think if we believed in Gandhi, this will be the way to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for delivering such a wonderful talk and getting awake 4 a.m. in the morning to deliver this. So I'm grateful to you for this pain you have taken for delivering this talk on World Philosophy Day.